Hello and welcome back to the Okta Developer and Integrator podcast. I'm Emily.
And I'm still Jeff. We're here again.
And today we're going to talk, starting out, about some of the recent news about Okta that you might have seen. So, what have we been in the news for lately, Jeff?
Yeah, so some of you may realize that there's this new thing happening around the industry with AI. If you haven't noticed anything about AI, I'm I guess kind of jealous. How would you avoid all of that news for this long? But specifically, there's been a lot more growth in a particular area that we touched on in this podcast in an earlier episode. We're talking about the Model Context Protocol, or MCP. Since we last spoke, MCP has really become an actual working group that's starting to form around how we can drive the new capabilities of agents speaking to other agents and resources. And Okta's been paying attention to this new advent of technology. We've also been exploring not just how agents can communicate, but how we could protect the periphery. So what I like to say is, like, there's a real great CS problem or computer science problem with how agents are communicating with other agents that seems to be really tantalizing, the order of scale and how they connect to the resources and even the large language models that they'll be pulling and synthesizing their data from. Since we're focused on enterprise identity security, we want to see what happens around the edges of all of those communications in the event that these agents start borrowing user identities to take actions on behalf of the users. When you look at this from an enterprise perspective, creates an interesting problem space with the intersection of this innovation in the stalwart position of enterprise security. And we've been looking at how we could provide value in that particular arena. And out of that came this new cross-app access protocol proposal that we have with the OpenID Federation. In the interest of transparency, we'll drop a link to the draft that one of my colleagues, Aaron Parecki, has created that he's actually driving forward with the IETF and the OAuth working groups. But getting back to it, he's also participating with the MCP working groups, specifically focused on the authorization piece to make sure that when this lands, we all get it right. Not just Okta, but we as a collective society of humans get securing AI agents right. And Okta is actually taking a big stance on this. And this is what you've seen a lot in the news is Okta speaking more forward thinking about how we can secure AI agents at scale. I actually have the privilege of working very closely with the team that's working on that project. And with my work that I've been helping to shepherd on the cross-app access feature, we're now crafting like a holistic story. So there's just a lot happening right now. You see a lot of rapid changes. Actually, well, as an exciting anecdote, I've actually, when I've talked to other ISVs and other people in the industry, just how we've had to like correct ourselves with our understanding of MCP at that moment, knowing that it's actually going to be changed. And now that we're getting an actual working process, we're starting to see the normal drafts and regular cadence of working group meetings, calls, and overall progress starting to take shape, which is great because now we can actually report more accurately on the current state as it's actually changing.
Yeah, MCP has been such a moving target. And even when it was initially discussed by Anthropic, they were talking about how the security side of things does have a way to go before it's a fully mature spec. And just like any really new little product, you can kind of get away with not being fully enterprise grade security when you're first testing it out. Most people were running their MCP servers on the same machine as their clients because that was the scale at which we were able to use it. But then as it becomes more broadly accepted, more of a standard, we're starting to look at traffic going across the network. We're starting to look at more opportunities for systems outside of our own control to be communicating with this protocol. And therefore, the security need just keeps going up.
Yeah, and I think I don't have any fault with the approach. Like, this all works like layers. And I think early on in my career, was that someone described security to me like a 7-layer burrito, right? You have different layers of security that you need to secure all the way through the stack until you actually get to the actual bare metal at the end of the day. And same thing works here. If you're building a new protocol, you kind of have to start somewhere. knowing like what you're actively deferring because you want to solve the clear problems at hand. But the other thing is to reach out, and especially with this being open source, opening it up to the community and saying like, I don't have an answer for maybe authorization, but I know it's important when we get to a point. Someone else can raise their hand and say, hey, I actually can speak on this. Maybe someone that works with OAuth like Aaron does and say, I can help here and actually lean in and start to craft the strategy and shape around how we will connect these agents to users, especially users in an enterprise setting.
Exactly. You get specs coming out of a community that builds it together, and every member of that community really has their own special thing that they're able to bring, their own expertise, their own angle on it. And I'm really glad that Aaron's able to bring our security mindedness and his own security mindedness to enhance it.
Yeah, I think we should have him on at some point to talk about it when he gets a free moment. But he's a busy guy these days.
Well, for sure, yeah. And then cross-app access. Would you describe it? Well, I wouldn't describe it as a competitor to MCP. I would describe it as a complement to it. It's part of how we tell that story about how do all these new moving parts fit together with our existing infrastructure? Because nowhere that's doing big stuff already is going to be that green field of just spin it up on your laptop. We already have a ton of security, a ton of identity, and we need to work within that framework to add on to it rather than trying to replace the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think it's important for those viewers, if you've missed the last time we talked about this. So cross-app access is really about bringing visibility to consent into the enterprise setting. The story that I like to tell is we had big behemoths like Google really tackling a lot of the B2C concerns, and with Google Workspace, you had this central place where you could establish your identity, work with a vast suite of products, and connect those products to other third-party integrations that had a ton of value. Take Grammarly for an example, right? I can connect Google to Grammarly and get suggestions on how I can write better within the context of my documents, presentations, emails, right?
Now, when I connect Google to Grammarly, despite having a employer-managed Google account that I act in to represent the company that I work for, I, as an individual, say, yes, I consent to Grammarly accessing all my data, and that just always feels kind of weird. It's like, am I really the person who should be making this decision?
That's exactly right. We constantly hear that users, once they subtly switch their hats from being, autonomous person in the B2C scenario to employee in the workforce scenario, they're very weary about what they are connecting. There's a lot of policies. There's a lot of fear about breaching and data leakage that can come with corporate security policies. And so this is a remnant of that B2C pioneering that we did early on, and consent being managed by the user when in the B2C scenario, I am the proprietor and custodian of all of my data. And so it makes sense for me to consent another app to use that data. But when I'm
in the enterprise scenario, I don't want to put myself on the spot for being the legal representative of the whole company's decision about whether or not to share everything I have insight into. That seems really risky. And it seems like we have specialists whose job it is to know whether or not we ought to be sharing this.
That's exactly right. And you see on the other side, once I grant that application consent, I no longer have access. I don't see this from a customer or a company perspective. That consent has been granted outside of the visibility of the IDP because it's Google and Grammarly. It's not Google and the IDP working with Grammarly to establish this connection between the three joint parties. So it's not really balanced in the truest sense. It needs to come back and be balanced by the three parties that are involved. A requesting app that needs information from a resource app, and the customer that has to broker the connection between the two.
Yeah, and we want it easier for the individual end user and more consistent and easier to manage for the identity administrators who are working within that IDP and going, people on these teams should just all have Grammarly. They shouldn't have to hit the button. It should just be there.
Yeah, that's right. And so one big feature of this new product and this new protocol is that it removes the end user consent. And that's one that we've just been talking about. On the flip side, we also see another benefit that it has for admins that have to manage multiple accounts to third-party services. You take any type of productivity aggregator, something like a Glean or a Dropbox Dash, that requires connection to each individual application on behalf of a user to source the data, that the files that those users have access to. Usually an IT admin, to get the full benefit of the platform, will have to create bespoke clients for each one of the individual integrations by however many accounts they have. So you're asked to say, get all of this value, is to tell the admin to go create n number of accounts across, more importantly, n number of domains. And if you look across the broad spectrum of SaaS applications, everyone does programmatic access slightly differently. They may use OAuth, but they might have a particular way that they do client provisioning. They might do API keys. They might do just secrets. They might do something else. They might just do accounts. And what you're left with at the end of the day, if you do go forage through all of these mountain of tasks, is you end up with highly permissioned credentials that have access to all of these systems. So the question becomes, how can we speed up the adoption on these aggregate SaaS applications and reduce the exposure to high privileged accounts? And actually, cross-app access does solve that problem as well. Because in this instance, like a Dropbox Dash or Glean, it was only required to have a connection to all of its third-party integrators. And it will borrow the context of the user to connect to each one of those integrations. And so from an IT admin perspective, all I really need to do is to set up, yes, Glean or Dropbox Dash can connect to Google Workspace, can connect to Miro, can connect to Figma, any one of these solutions that are out there. And that's the only client that they have to manage. At runtime, the admin, as he's assigned the user's access to all of these apps, can utilize Dropbox Dash or Glean to connect via that user account. So the user itself in the service account is a parameter by which you can search. And here with CAA, it's that actual principle that drives the interaction. And that is an important change. So you're no longer based on filtering, but you have access to everything, but you're only requiring a small surface area. You're assured that in that instance, as the user invokes whatever client or agent that they're accessing, that context is shared between the two, and the agent only has access to what the user has access to.
Interesting. So moving it from a parameter to a principal then is going to limit the scope, so we can never accidentally grant it more scope than that user had. Is it going to unlock some other benefits as well?
Yeah, so eventually, like what our plan is down the road is to start to incorporate other capabilities. So if you peel back the layers here.
Okay, so this sets us up so we can potentially build things that we could not have built in the old paradigm. And so I feel like I need a forward-looking statement slide here that now we're speculating about the kinds of things that we will be able to build in this architecture.
That's right. And I think it's really important to talk about how that transition, bringing what will be available in CAA once it's released, sets you up for a very forward-looking future that embraces the context application to these agents, whether they're semi-autonomous or fully autonomous. And again, that's like the area that I've really loved diving into, is the philosophical change in these machine access points. And we're introducing non-determinism into agents. And that's what's creating this whole need to make sure we've got an extra layer. So let me step back and talk about that. Our current clients are very deterministic. You give an event, you give a time window, they do certain things, they make a limited amount of decisions, and it just goes forward. Like what I've input in is exactly.
It's some regarded as a feature that you can test the whole thing, but then it's only going to do what you told it to, and that there is a certain appeal to having something that can do just whatever you ask for, or at least attempt it.
Yeah, and so your context that you're applying is not true context in which you're evaluating at runtime. You're kind of just changing the parameters with which you invoke said client or process. And now when you introduce non-determinism, meaning I'm not sure that the input that I give in will give the same output every time, I'm now looking more like the unpredictability of a user. And so context becomes increasingly more important here. And so when you look at how we evaluate users in the Okta sense, pre-authentication, during authentication, post-authentication. Subtly, you see us as we're bringing in CAA. We're starting to apply those same concepts to agents and non-human identities. And I think that's a really important key concept because that unlocks a lot of the key features that keep our users safe. We can now keep our agents safe. Things like continuous access evaluation policies or CAPE policies can be applied to agents now that they have context that they're sharing. And things like pre-auth governance or assignments can be evaluated at runtime to know whether or not we should authorize a client to access.
And that is such a huge insight that agents, in the sense of language models, need the kind of safeguards that we build for users. If you ever set up Claude Code on your desktop, you may notice that the help page has this big long section about how to restore your Linux install if you accidentally tell Claude that it's okay to rmrf/, which is like the first thing that you learn when you're doing Linux sysadmin stuff, that maybe you don't want to do that if you want to keep having a working system. But without those guardrails of actually you are a mere userland user who can't do that without sudo and you don't have sudo, then without those old guardrails we used to give to people, it can't really act safely and within an appropriate scope. And we have the same problem scaling up to bigger identity problems as well as local to your own machine.
Yeah, that's very well put. I don't think that there's a way around missing any of these things and still having a very strong security posture. And when we talk about just the overall growth in this particular arena, that's going to become an absolute necessity.
Yeah, it feels almost like there's a strict trade-off between the predictability of the thing that you're managing identity for and the safety of just letting it do whatever. Where if it's a script that's extremely predictable, extremely well tested, then it can be safe to not run it like as a user, to give it more permissions. But if you've got a user, a language model, anything that's going to do brand new, unexpected stuff, suddenly the more brand new thing that's allowed to try, the more rules we need to keep it from accidentally stumbling into something destructive or intentionally stumbling into something destructive. But you can get there just fine with good intentions and an accident.
Yeah, I think I hadn't looked at it that way before, but if I actually had to concretely think about how do I limit or bound the context around a non-autonomous deterministic agent or process, well, I limit the instructions and maybe the logic. So it's all around the code that can bound the context of what that agent's supposed to do.
Yeah.
With a non-deterministic, semi-autonomous or autonomous agent, I have to limit the blast radius based on the permissions that I allow it. So it switches from guarding against code being written and testing in those code scenarios to just making sure all the guardrails are put in place so the agent can't go way off script, to coin a phrase, and actually start doing whatever it wants to do.
And I think it's also huge to note here that this doesn't necessarily imply malice. That just like the junior admin who really does think that we really are going to fix that disk space problem by removing / you can have a very well-intentioned language model trying really hard to help, but we've trained them on what people do and they are able to make the same categories of mistakes as people do, as well as the same categories of contributions and successes, or many of the same categories, not all the same categories, but a lot of the ways that I'm actually accustomed to seeing like novice open source devs contribute, and some of their same kinds of mistakes I'm seeing people complaining about in the community about folks who are empowered by AI.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, but we constantly see this with innovations, especially around the IDEs. I know me being a very old-fashioned coder where I used to do my HTML in Notepad. I used to work in Vim when I was doing other exercises. I loved the stripped down IDEs. I love just writing the code from what's in my brain. It's different. Like I have friends that do a lot of vibe coding, and I can feel that cantankerous old curmudgeon in me raising their fist to shake it at the clouds. And it's just about knowing how to use the technology for good and being aware of the possible blind spots and deficits that it can provide. And you doing your best to, be responsible about the code that you put out. Like these are not bad things. And I think it's just, the old adage of, we had to walk uphill both ways to school in 2 feet of snow in the middle of the blizzard. Somehow it was also a blizzard and it was blazing hot outside. We just dealt with all the extremes in the old days. Um, but this is really where we've come to, and I think it really we should embrace the change, but still keep our constant on how we secure the code and secure the users that will be invoking the code.
So it's really interesting that you bring up being a bit curmudgeonly about this, because I've played with the vibe coding tools on a variety of personal side projects that I otherwise wouldn't have had the time for. And I've started noticing a pattern where it feels a lot like if you go to some wizardly programmer who just knows all about the language and you say, will you build me a thing that does X? And they're like, I mean, I can, like, I'm not sure why you want that, but okay. And then if they just do exactly as you ask, you're going to end up with something really weird. There's an element of how to put it. It can feel like it's very good at giving you the kind of answer that someone of the level of expertise you ask the question at would be able to give. So the results vary wildly based on what you know to ask for.
Yeah, it reminds me, have you done pair programming in the past?
Yeah, less than I would like to, but it absolutely feels like pairing with someone just deeply knowledgeable. You can even get it to be opinionated if you ask nicely, but there's an amount of mutual feedback to keep each other in check that is just as necessary as it ever was.
Yeah, so I remember like back in the day when I would solo at a previous job, we would give everybody like a rubber duck and we would rubber duck our solutions. It's like somewhere between if the rubber duck could give you every specific answer that you wanted. And me fighting the battles as like a previous leader in project and engineering in that company, I was a big proponent of pair programming. I loved the human interaction and the way that we kept us honest. We ended up getting more resilient code out. But it was always like you're taking two people's time to release one story. That the math is kind of hard to justify. But now with vibe coding, it's like, well, why not have all of that information for free? Why not have all of that experience for free and then continue to get the benefits of having that oversight and that back and forth? Now, again, it's like having a pair that's never going to say no or never going to say, I don't think that's a good idea, or I'm afraid I can't let you do that.
Well,
yeah.
by default, yes. There are ways of setting things up where if you're clear about what your goals are, if you're like, my top goal in this is to be secure, every other step, let's assess for having added any vulnerabilities, you can get some pretty secure code out of it. But if you're like, you either explicitly or implicitly say, security is not a priority for me, I just want this out the door as fast as possible, then you're going to get the quality of code that you get when you ask a developer to just make it as fast as possible. Who cares about security?
So I guess the compromise here is it's the equivalent of having a pair that's kind of like a YOLO coder. And then you having to be the voice of reason and say, okay, I understand what you're saying to me, but we're not going to go all the way down this path. We want to first check. That might be a better way to look at it from those transitioning over to pairing, because we've all had that experience. I at one time may not have been that YOLO coder on our projects, but I think that's like that actually tempers it for me, where it then subtly transitions like you as the lead, or the, what did we call it, the person on the keyboard, but that person being like the mind of responsibility, and saying, okay, well, let's just make sure we're not doing anything.
That's interesting, because I almost feel like the roles are reversed. I feel like it's on the keyboard and I'm standing over its shoulder going, we can, but can does not mean should.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, and from the mechanics of it, you're right. You're right.
Because it's great at typing a lot of stuff out, but then you have to bring that kind of discretion, that clarity about what it is that you're trying to do, which I think is one of the unspoken advantages of pair and community code development in general, is that the minute you get more than one person involved, you have to start articulating, why is it that we do it this way? What are we actually trying to build? What are we not trying to build here that can be easily mistaken for what we are trying to build? And with people, you have to answer, well, if you do want to build that other thing, where should you go to do it? But with language models, you can just be like, no, this is explicitly out of scope. We are not going that way. And it'll roll with it. And I've heard that called context engineering as an outgrowth of prompt engineering, where it's not just about what you ask it for. It's about everything else you give it to help it understand the nuances of the problem so that it has a better chance to create a result, an artifact that accounts for those nuances.
Yeah, I think that's it's an interesting advent from this whole age that we're in, where we've always said this when we're interviewing engineers. We want good engineers who know code and who can think, but like a big proponent is like, can you think? I think it's interesting that context engineering is driving home kind of that, how can you think and communicate your thoughts in questions that drive code being generated. And so the skill set subtly transitions to like, can you do inheritance, or can you limit like the big O, all these CS problems that we've had in the past, to just, can you articulate the goal of the problem that's presented in a way that stimulates the agent to generate the code necessary to solve that problem in a straightforward, secure manner, right? So those are going to be the types of, I imagine that if we fast forward 5 years, engineering interviews will be some combination of code plus questions and prompting in this AI scenario.
Oh, yeah. I would not be at all surprised if a few years down the road, we're taking interviews where, I mean, it went from write your code on a whiteboard to here's an IDE for whatever our puzzle is. And it's kind of a next step from the IDE to here is an agent to help you do the thing. Cause this agent to do the thing well.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see if there's, another avenue for these kind of sandbox AI models where you just say, we're going to join, like we have community whiteboards or some of these highly collaborative tools that we'll use for interviews, but to just have an interface where two people are joined in this prompt and you say, here's the engineering problem, and we're going to record and even possibly have another AI evaluator look at how the AI is evaluating the prompts. Like that would be such a mind-blowing scenario to see. That's how we're evaluating talent, is does the human engineer prompts pass the evaluation criteria of the AI?
That's a really interesting one to think about, because you're kind of asking this deeper question of every time we get a new tool, we need to find out how to assess skill with that tool. And how are we going to assess skill with language model tools? From my perspective, I'm not so sure if it's the prompt that we would be assessing versus the output, because I feel like that's a bit like judging what someone types into your, let's say, HackerRank puzzle, as opposed to how fast did it actually complete the challenge.
Yeah, I think there would be a rubric. I'm thinking on the fly that, if you get the right answer, then it's measuring how you got to that right answer, similar to like how you would look at the code. So like the body of work that you have to evaluate the candidate on is going to be around how they engineer the prompts to create the solution. Also, like, is the solution, that goes without saying that the solution does answer the problem in a satisfactory way. But you'll have varying degrees on this. But what I think what's interesting is, like, we have evaluation criteria based on how we read and interpret code, because we're reading and interpreting. We'll have to read and interpret this candidate's code when they're working. But now it's, well, can the AI agents, like, what is the human, in a nihilistic standpoint, what does the human actually matter? Because the AI platform is the one that needs to interpret those prompts. So that's who should be doing the evaluate. Do they work well with this candidate? And which is, I mean, there's we don't need to dive deep in the sci-fi
Definitely a nerd snack
dystopia.
over
Yeah,
there
but it's
where
like it's kind of there if you look at this kind of at scale.
yeah, it's definitely an interesting question of like we've shifted how we solve problems. But then although it's a brand new tool and keeps surprising people with what it can and can't and does and doesn't do, there's a certain familiarity to especially the context engineering stuff where I take a look, like I've had friends share their cod.md files that they're using in projects where it's going well, and I read through it and I go, this is just best practices open source community stuff. We're being really clear about what it is we're trying to do. We're being really clear about how we're trying to do it. We're capturing things we've learned throughout the process so we can avoid making the same mistakes over. And sure, we're doing it with different language users than we used to be, but I'm finding it fascinating how those core patterns of the feedback loop of try a thing, learn from the thing, try an informed next thing based on what we learned are relatively stable.
Yeah, and I mean, I see a lot of similarities from, how my career developed. And again, I have a very strange and winding road toward getting to where I am today. I was a religious studies major who took CS classes in college. Part of what made me stand out was this ability to understand the philosophy of what we were building and to boil that down into really good concrete questions that can unearth assumptions and derive value and create insights. And I see that coming full circle because even a lot of how I look to improve is, am I asking good questions? And these prompts are about asking good questions in the ways that can get good code to be written. I think there's a lot more similarities in what you're talking about. Is what I'm talking about is kind of a reach, but I feel in the general sense a lot there's a lot more correlation than what I felt in the past, because before it was just how can you code, how can you program, less about how are you thinking through a problem. And there was some of this, but it was balanced a lot on how you could actually code. And I feel like those scales are tipping in the direction of being able to think more and code less.
Yeah, and to ask good questions,
Yeah.
because often asking the right question to a system that's able to answer it, whether that system is an engineer or a language model, is what it takes to make some breakthrough. And I find it really interesting that you're talking about just like the skill of asking the good questions, because that's a huge part of what I see in the prompts that I see people sharing. Like, oh my gosh, I discovered this amazing prompt. We should ask what could go wrong and anticipate that. And I'm like, yeah, this is a helpful way of thinking, whether it's you doing the thinking or you're outsourcing the thinking. But it's kind of cool to have this framework for how we communicate about the thought processes we use and the questions we ask in the process of doing engineering.
Yeah, it's interesting that like I never thought of that too, but are sharing prompts
Mhm.
in a non-deterministic fashion. Do we look at those prompts giving us different answers? Because there's a whole lot to talk about. How does IP get generated in the form of asking the same? Like if you give 5 engineers the same prompt across 5 different LLMs, where's the IP? Is the IP in the prompt or in the resulting code? And I think that's actually probably a bigger question that'll come about later as more more code in the general ethos becomes more related to AI generated content as opposed to human generated content where those lines are clear.
Yeah,
These agents are shared. Yeah.
I suspect that we will build a cultural skill of assessing code quality on a level of abstraction that we haven't necessarily needed to before. Because the question is less about did this come from a biological entity or a digital entity, and more about like, is this good? Is this done in a way that's maintainable? Am I going to regret having used this?
Mhm. I think when it gets to the space of what is deemed, like when we talk about scary concepts like what is patentable in this arena, that's where I think there's going to be a lot of gray areas. Um,
There are going to be some fascinating court cases for sure.
yeah, that's part of what I think is like the next frontier. Obviously, we have our pioneering frontier, and then there is rapidly approaching some sort of either litigation or legal pursuit, which will also be very interesting to see how we adapt all of this to incorporate generative content coming from now like two main sources, which will be human and human and computer.
Yeah, and then how do you even categorize a piece of work that's done by both collaboratively?
Yeah, that's right. There'll be some interesting precedents laid down about how we view the contributions of machine to the contributions of man in general and the general mankind. Those will be fun philosophical debates to listen to and to read about.
Yeah, there is too much possibility space for me to even really speculate about it, because the first thing that comes to mind is that when it all comes to a head will have a huge impact, where what is the level of understanding of the technology that we can communicate to decision makers in a way that makes sense to them. Because anyone who claims to fully understand exactly what's going on and why, I'm a little bit suspicious of. There might be some people who can explain large parts of it, but then the terms we need in order to describe things accurately enough are so alien that you need another description to understand the terms, and pretty soon you're sounding like a CS postdoc, and
Yeah.
can a layperson even understand you?
Yeah, and this is where I kind of like being the PM in this standpoint is we have to be comfortable from the PM standpoint in degrees of ambiguity. We try to bring clarity to ambiguity, but you kind of have to embrace it when you're like in it to start making sense of all of it. And this is just fascinating. I think with all of the changes that are afoot, just being comfortable to say, I don't really know, but I'm going to strap in and enjoy the ride, because there are going to be so many ups and downs here as all of the work gets ironed out. But it's such a fascinating time to be working in the space, because we're living through a real technical revolution.
Yeah.
Which I don't think that we've seen. Maybe crypto, but crypto wasn't as like hot at this time. I remember having friends that were in it early stages. There was a lot of underground buzz. This is a lot of just it feels like it's in the zeitgeist of AI now, and that's what I think is different. That I'm really just having a blast just listening to everything that's going on.
Yeah, I think even crypto wasn't necessarily as widespread, because we have the joke about, oh, just put it on the blockchain, but a lot of things are just fine without it. There's not really a value add from adding blockchain, whereas I find it hard to name a project where a real like 10x productivity, to use another buzzword, for people who know how to solve the problem and just need more typing applied to their solution. We have this world in which suddenly scalability of a certain clearly defined flavor of work becomes very possible. I'm not saying scalability of all work, because I was seeing a post on LinkedIn just earlier today about someone trying to hire someone to clean up their vibe coded mess. And I think everyone agrees that we're probably going to see a lot more of that as time goes on, and we get more successful despite themselves pieces of software, I'll just call them.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. And I know people talking about revolutions and who gets included and who gets excluded. I really think this will be another turning point where humanity adapts. Roles change to embrace the changes in AI. And there'll be just a new frontier of different types of jobs. Some will be newly created, some will, become obsolete, but we'll make a transition over. And again, it's these are the scales of progress that really drive us forward when we have such rapid technological advancements. But we're resilient and find different ways to be creative, I guess, is where I would summarize that. And there'll always be a need for that creativity.
Yeah, and like if you pick up the magic lamp and the metaphorical genie comes out and says, "What do you wish for?" You're probably going to wish for something that is relevant to the situation you're in. So we're making all of these wishes for code, and we're getting more and more code that's relevant to kind of the status quo. And so that brings us around full circle to the security implications, I think, and to how cross-out access, MCP, and other protocols are going to let us integrate this more seamlessly and let it help us out where it's able to help.
Yeah, one analogy I like in this sense is this whole AI revolution is building a car that can go 600 miles an hour. And what we're trying to do at Okta is to make sure we got a safe, clean, level, straight roadway in which that car can go as fast as it wants. But it's not in any risk of crashing or damaging anything else. So we'll provide that firm, stable foundation to go as fast as you want.
Mm-hmm. And maybe we'll give the driver some really good airbags and a parachute.
Oh yeah, we'll always have recommendations for safety.
Yeah. And to some extent, we'll be able to make it much, much easier to follow the safe and good decisions path than to do things the unsafe way. We won't always make it impossible, but we can definitely make sure, very sure, that you do know what you're doing and you really do want to do it the other way if you're asking for that.
Well, I mean, even in that same analogy, you're going to teach customers how to slowly upgrade their cars until they get to the fastest car on the safest track, right? But you don't want to just put them in to that car unprepared.
The upgrade metaphor hits a little too close to home, because what about, well, we definitely need to upgrade the chassis because everybody sees the chassis. You definitely need to upgrade the motor because the motor makes us go fast. Now brakes, we'll deal with the brakes later.
Yeah, and I think that is creating some awareness of you may not get anywhere else if you don't upgrade the brakes first. So impressing the importance of building safely and deliberately is something that we can educate. There's always an avenue. I do firmly believe that people want to move fast, but they don't necessarily intend to be reckless. There might just be information that they're not aware of, and we want to provide that information to make educated decisions on how you can get there as quickly as possible.
You want to get there as fast as you can, but at the end of the day, you want to get there.
That's right. A lot of app driving analogies.
Yeah. So speaking of where we're getting, let's talk about the future of cross-out access and how we can start playing with hooking it up to things, start playing with hooking it up to, let's say, our own MCP server that we might be working on to enhance our users' ability to use that correctly and appropriately through the identity provider that we're using. Yeah.
So first, let's talk some wins about cross-app access. In cross-app access, we're planning a release to coincide with our major conference that we hold every year. So that'll be coming toward the end of September. And this will be a release that sort of opens cross-app access to the rest of the world. We'll also, if you're an ISV out there listening to this podcast and you're like, I gotta hear more, I really want to get involved, I really want to talk to the team, we're going to drop a link to an external interest form that you can fill out, and we'll be looking to process that and get you a tenant where you can see this working. We're planning to go live with this feature by the end of our year, which is sometime in January. And you'll hear a lot of this as you tune into Octane, so that's another plug for Octane. You'll really hear us talk in depth about firming up this whole AI security initiative that we're driving. There's been a lot of press out there, as you've probably seen if you're attached to our Okta channels, where we are really describing the true value of this feature. So there's a lot happening. We've got a lot of, just keep on Okta in the news and you'll start to hear more about this. And if you're interested, by all means, fill out that form and get involved.
Yeah, because part of the process of developing a protocol like this that works for everybody's needs is getting those early users to play with it and tell us what you like and tell us what you don't like. Tell us what's not working for you. Tell us what you need. So check below for a link to sign up so that you'll be the first to know when it's ready to get those hands on it.
Yeah. And then finally, there's this is a proposed protocol. So again, we've dropped a little bit earlier a link into the draft that's available. Again, Okta wants everyone to be safe in this new age of AI. And so that's why we're making this proposal on the standards form and not just, Okta proprietary. Like this is something that, I firmly believe in as a member of this team working on this particular product, that this is a good step forward for us building secure agents all over the place. Like again, we want to move fast, but we also want to be safe.
Yeah, and building a public spec and an open protocol means that nobody else has to reinvent this particular wheel. And it's like the adage about many eyes making bugs shallow. You want everybody working together on getting the security protocols as robust as you can when it's something for this level of importance.
I totally agree. It's a community effort. I guess, we want our sources to stay open. So, too. But
yeah.
I
love
and actually, yeah,
has that community thing where I can imagine how readily a company might go, oh, this is our proprietary value add. It's only for us, but then everybody else misses out.
Yeah, speaking of which, we did sort of tease open source. We will also drop a link, as I'm mentioning this here, to our open GitHub repo, where you can actually see this working with a couple of example apps. It also has a good video produced by Aaron Parecki, who's our standards director, talking through how this protocol works and how it actually works works live. So take a look there too if you want to just learn more and actually experience the code. What would it take for you to be a requesting app or a resource app if you want?
Yeah, so your challenge, should you choose to accept it, is to go learn about how to do the cool stuff you're already doing, build the cool integrations you're already building with cross-app access to help make it that much easier for identity admins to get humans and agents teaming up to do cool stuff with your software.
Wow. Feels like this just flew by again. And I think we left with some really good nuggets. Like just to recap, take a look at Okta in the news. We're big on securing AI agents, and we're releasing cross-app access in the September timeframe corresponding with Octane. And also, we have an open request form that you'll see in the links in this video, as well as an open source repository to explore the feature. So get involved. Let us know what you thought. And thanks for spending some time with us. Any final thoughts, Emily?
Yeah, there's something that's actually been at the back of my mind as we've been talking about AI through this. And that is that there are some people out there who go, I'm not going to touch it at all. And I'm really not sure at this point whether you can learn how it works deeply enough to make an informed decision about what you want to do with it by just standing on the sidelines. I would recommend assessing what tools are available to you. We've now got a pretty broad spread of pretty well-established tools with a lot of discourse about their strengths and weaknesses, and pick something where the strengths and weaknesses align with your own values about the kind of entities that you want to be working with, and then give it a shot. If you try it and then you hate it, then you can make a really informed argument as to why you prefer not to use it. And I think that's a better situation to be in than the, I know I hate that kind of vegetables. I've never tried them, but I just know they're going to be icky.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I think if you're using Google as a search engine, you're getting exposed to AI. But I understand that there's a big leap to start actually saying, I want to get into a Claude, or I want to get into a Gemini. And I think actually stepping through, there's a couple of really good exercises that I think are tangible enough to get exposed to AI. First is asking open questions that you want maybe some deeper extended research on, and just have Gemini or whatever your favorite LLM is help you, or agent to LLM help you generate it, and just check those results out. Secondarily, the more fun one is to work on image creation. This image creation, I think, is caught on like wildfire. And if you're not worried about, just generating some silly images, like play around with that as well. Like, there's a lot of good tutorials that are out there, but those are kind of like low impact. They're not really taking your data. They're not really doing a lot of the crazy invasive things that people can be scared of, but it will get you exposed to what the power of these AI engines can do. And maybe that'll inspire you to take one step further to using it to actually generate some of your work and share some of your data with an LLM. But the
And
other thing I'll say is always look at how they're using that data as well.
And if we're talking about suggested activities to start out with artificial intelligence, when you get into a situation where you're actually driving it, you're having a multi-prompt conversation instead of just getting handed it when you use a search engine or something, getting that obnoxious little sparkle to generate something for you in any web page these days, I would recommend first, make up an alter ego who's not quite you. Maybe they live in the next town over. Maybe they're a few years older or younger, and you don't need to give it your real data. You can be an alter ego there. And then ask it to research a topic that you're deeply knowledgeable about. If you know exactly where to shop for a certain item in your region, ask it for its advice on shopping like that. And ask it a few things where you do know the whole answer, and pay really close attention to its oversights and the things that it misses, the nuances that you get and it doesn't, and figure out what you would have to ask it to get all that nuance that you have, because the ways that you have to change how you ask questions to get the answer you know is good, that's a way that you're going to have to change how you ask questions whenever you want a good answer.
I really like that. So you've got a whole lot that you can pull from if you want to get started with AI.
Yeah, so get out there, and I hope you have a ton of fun with it. And thank you, as always, for tuning in with us.
Thank you again. Thank you for joining us.